Back in Britain's colder, harder working days, breakfast like this was quite a flex. In richer homes, a big cooked plate in the morning basically said, "Relax, we have got plenty." The roots go back to the landed gentry, and the Victorian turned into a proper set meal. Later, cafe hotels and weekends helped push into a everyday tradition. So what's on the plate? Bacon, sausages, eggs, baked beans, grilled tomatoes, mushrooms, black pudding, plus toast or fried bread. Calorie-wise, a typical plate sits around 800 to 1000 calories and about 60 grams of fat. Finland's breakfast was built by climate, not luxury. Rye was first cultivated there more than 2000 years ago because it could handle the short northern summer. So rye bread became a staple. This is why Finnish breakfast feels simple, warm and practical. So what's on the plate? Oat porridge with the berries, butter, dark rye bread with the butter and cheese. Another traditional favorite is karja lampirakka, a Karelian pie with a rye crust and rice filling, usually topped with a egg butter. Calorie-wise, a normal home-style Finnish breakfast is around 400 to 544 calories, with roughly around 15 grams of fat. Ireland's breakfast had one clear message: you're not snacking, you are surviving. And there is little history behind that. The big fry-up style breakfast took off across Britain and Ireland in the Victorian era. And in the island, it clicked with a rural life. Farm workers needed a real fuel, and household used what they had. Pork cut into rashers, oats and spices turned into black and white pudding, plus a quick bread from the griddle. So what's on the plate? Rashers, sausages, eggs, black pudding, white pudding, mushrooms, grilled tomatoes, often beans and brown soda bread, sometimes potato falls, potato bread if you're lucky. Calorie-wise, a proper full Irish often lands around 850 to 1000 calories, roughly 45 to 65 grams of fat. Iceland built breakfast for survival, not show. In a North Atlantic climate, food had to be simple, filling, and easy to keep. Skyr has been a part of Icelandic food culture since the Viking Age, and rye bread became a real staple too, with some loaves traditionally baked for generations using geothermal heat in the ground. That's why Icelandic breakfast feels practical, old and built to handle the climate. So what's on the plate? A traditional Icelandic breakfast is usually skyr, oatmeal and dark rye bread, butter, cheese and smoked fish like a salmon or herring. Calorie-wise, a normal Icelandic breakfast is roughly around 350 to 500 calories, with about 8 to 15 grams of fat. France's breakfast grew out of a bread culture, not a big cooking. French sources trace breakfast we know today back to Renaissance, when bread and butter dipped in a milk started to appear. By the 19th century, city mornings were more about tartines and café au lait, and after World War II, the modern French breakfast really became a daily habit. This is why it stayed light, bakery first and built around bread. So what's on the plate? Baguettes, tartines, butter, jam, honey, croissant, brioche, or pain au chocolat, a chocolate-filled pastry. Calorie-wise, a normal French breakfast is usually around 300 to 450 calories, with roughly around 10 to 15 grams of fat. Germany doesn't really do one big cooked plate for a breakfast. Germany does a bread table, and there is little history behind that. When bread is the everyday staple, easy to bake, easy to buy fresh, breakfast turns into something you assemble, not something you cook. Everyone builds their own bite fast. So what's on the plate? Brötchen and sliced bread, butter, jam, honey, cheese, and the cold cuts like ham, salami, or leberwurst. Often there's a boiled egg on the side. Calorie-wise, a typical full version often lands around 600 to 900 calories, with roughly 25 to 45 grams of fat. Hungary wakes up hungry. and it actually makes sense. Fresh bread, cold meats, and dairy were easy to buy, easy to keep, and easy to turn into a proper meal without cooking. Fast spelling, no fuss. Then paprika became signature flavor in Hungarian food, so it naturally worked its way into sausages, breads, and anything that needed a bit more life. So what's on a plate? Zemle rolls or slices of bread, butter, lard, salami, ham, cheese, tomato, pepper, cucumber, and spring onion, and very often tafel somewhere on the table too. Calorie-wise, a full breakfast like that usually land around 550 to 850 calories with roughly 25 to 45 grams of fat. Italy's breakfast can shock outsiders, but the history explains it. This was never built around a giant cooked plate. It grew around the bar. A few words, a coffee at the counter, then straight back into the day. And the pastry has its own backstory too. The Italian cornetto, the soft, sweet breakfast pastry, a bit like a croissant, traces back to the Austrian Kipferl, then became a softer, sweeter, and much more likely to be filled. So what's on the plate? Cappuccino or an espresso, plus a cornetto, often filled with a custard, jam, or a chocolate. And in parts of northern Italy, people call it brioche. Calorie-wise, it's sneaky. A cappuccino plus filled cornetto is around 380 to 500 calories, with about 20 to 30 grams of fat. Denmark built breakfast the practical way. Old Danish morning grew out of a grain culture. In the Viking Age, rye, barley, and oats were major cereal, and people turned them into bread and porridge. Over time, rye bread became a real national staple, with the Danes eating rye bread for more than 1,000 years. That's why Danish breakfast stayed simple, filling, and built around grain. So what's on the plate? A traditional Danish breakfast usually a dense rye bread or bread rolls with the butter, cheese, and jam, oatmeal, yogurt, soft-boiled egg. Calorie-wise, a normal Danish breakfast is around 350 to 450 calories, with about 14 to 15 grams of fat. The Greek breakfast goes back a long way. In ancient Greece, the first meal was called akrotisma, usually a simple bread, often barley bread, dipped in wine, sometimes with figs or olives. Over time, that modest start turned into a breakfast built around what Greece had plenty of: bread, olive oil, honey, cheese, yogurt, and local pies. So Greek breakfast never became one cooked plate. It stayed simple, regional, and tied to the land. So what's on the plate? Fresh bread or paksimatya, hard barley rusk with a feta or cheese, olives and a little olive oil, and a thick Greek yogurt with a honey. Then comes the bakery side. Tiropita, a flaky cheese pie, sapanakopita, a spinach pie, koyori, a seasoned bread ring, bogatsa, a flaky pastry usually filled with a custard or cheese. Calorie-wise, a normal traditional Greek breakfast usually lands around 450 to 650 calories, with roughly 18 to 30 grams of fat.